Hi, everyone. Here are 10 facts about history that your school probably never taught you. Number 10. The Great Library of Alexandria burned down. Imagine losing everything you have ever read. Well, that's exactly what happened when the Great Library of Alexandria burned down. It happened around the year 4800 years ago, burning over 4,000 scrolls. And some people even say that humanity lost thousands of years of science, medicine, and inventions. But no one knows for sure how much was actually lost. It is believed that it took 100 years to collect all of those books. So imagine how much knowledge we might have missed out on. If someone had been guarding the library, this may have been the greatest disaster in the history of mankind. But sadly, no one knows what secrets were lost forever in the flames. No. 9. The real reason for the Crusades. Most people probably learned that the Crusades were a holy war between Christians and Muslims to take back the Holy Land from the Muslims. But there was more to the story than just religion. During these Crusades, European knights looted Muslim cities. They killed anyone who wasn't Christian, and they took their land. Then they sold these lands to nobles and wealthy European families. So while it was called a holy war, really it was about getting land, power, and wealth. The religious aspect was just a front so they could do horrible things and not feel guilty. While they were called heroes in some churches, they were simply thieves in disguise. No. 8. The dark side of Christopher Columbus. In school, we usually learn that Christopher Columbus discovered America. He was an Italian explorer who sailed across the Atlantic Ocean and landed in the Americas. But that's not really what happened. There were already people living in the Americas for thousands of years. In fact, there are many different civilizations, and when Columbus arrived, he didn't know that. He actually thought he was in India. So instead of discovering America, he stumbled upon the Bahamas, and once he realized where he was, he began enslaving the native people, killing many of them and even starting a genocide. When he returned to Europe, he told everyone that the natives were like animals and that they would be perfect slaves. And he started selling the natives to slave traders. So while he did discover the Bahamas, he was not a hero. Instead, he was a murderer and a thief. Number 7. Nikola Tesla. Most people today have heard of Thomas Edison. He invented the light bulb and helped bring electricity into our homes. But he didn't invent alternating current. That was Nikola Tesla. And he also invented the induction motor, the remote control, and the three-phase system. This is the way that most factories get their power. So without Nikola Tesla, we wouldn't have any of that. And he was a genius. Unfortunately, Thomas Edison wanted to make sure that his friend did not steal his thunder. So he hired someone to sabotage Tesla's inventions, and then he took all of the credit for himself. After that, Tesla became very sick and he died alone in a hotel room. No. 6. The Forgotten Black Pharaohs. Most people know that ancient Egypt had a bunch of famous pharaohs like Tutankhamun or Ramesses the Pigeon. But what they don't know is that for a brief time, there were black pharaohs ruling Egypt. This was during the 25th dynasty of Egypt. These were Nubian kings who had ruled over the south of Egypt for a long time. Then in 700 BC, they took over all of Egypt. They ruled for over a century, but no one remembers them. Why? Because Western historians have almost completely ignored them. So while your teacher may have talked about Egyptian pharaohs, they definitely did not talk about these. No. 5. Operation Northwoods. The United States and Cuba have a complicated relationship. The two countries are only 90 miles apart, but they have been enemies since the 1950s. And in the 1960s, things were really tense. At this time, President Kennedy wanted to remove Fidel Castro from power. He tried for several years, but nothing worked. So he came up with an evil plan. His top officials met in a secret meeting called Operation Northwoods. They wanted to stage attacks against Americans and then blame Cuba. They would do things like blow up a U.S. ship full of American soldiers. Then they would blame Cuba and use it as an excuse to start a war. Now, thankfully, President Kennedy never approved the plan. But if he had, it would have been one of the worst events in history. And the crazy thing is your teacher probably never told you about it. No. 4. The Partition of India. In 1947, the British left India, and the country split into two separate pieces. This was called the Partition of India. It is considered to be one of the largest mass migrations in the history of mankind. Over 10 million people had to move from their homes to another part of the country. This caused huge problems. Thousands of villages were destroyed and over 2 million people died. But outside of South Asia, almost nobody knows about this. In the West, it is barely taught in schools. Most people don't even know that India was ever ruled by the British. No. 3. Women in war. Throughout history, women have had to disguise themselves as men and join the army. Back in the olden times, women weren't allowed to be soldiers, but they still wanted to fight alongside the men. One of the most famous female warriors was Deborah Sampson. She joined the Continental Army during the American Revolution. She hid her gender by cutting off all of her hair and wearing baggy clothes. She fought bravely, but eventually she had to leave because she got pregnant. Even though she was a woman, she is now a hero in the U.S. military. Many female soldiers have followed in her footsteps. Number 2. The Salem Witch Trials. In the 1690s, there was a series of trials in Salem, Massachusetts. 19 people were put to death for practicing witchcraft. This was a scary time for the people of Salem. Many of them were put in jail, even though they hadn't done anything wrong. But while everyone fears magic and witches, the Salem witch trials were not about magic at all. They were about fear and control. People were accused of being witches because they were different. They were punished for not following the rules of society. Also, many of them had argued with their neighbors over land, and since they couldn't sue them in court, they accused them of witchcraft instead. So while it seems like a dark chapter in superstitious history, really it was just a dark chapter in the history of people being mean to each other. No. 1. Ancient civilizations were more advanced than taught in school. In history class, students learn about the Great Pyramids of Egypt and the big statue of Christ the Redeemer in Brazil. But no one learns about the amazing inventions of the Mayan civilization. For example, the Mayans kept calendars and knew a lot about astronomy. They made incredible artwork, and their buildings were magnificent. They built pyramids hundreds of years before Egypt. They also invented a type of concrete that lasted for centuries. Then we have ancient Baghdad. It was the capital of the Abbasid Caliphate. This was in modern-day Iraq. The city was enormous. It had beautiful gardens, and it was extremely wealthy. In fact, it had a hospital 600 years before Europe had one. What you learned in school is that the Middle East is backwards and violent. But that's not true. There were many peaceful and smart people living in the Middle East, and many scientists and inventors lived in Baghdad. Thanks for watching. What other facts about history do you think schools should teach? Let me know in the comments below. See you next time.